So undoubtedly, unarguably, Jesus was the greatest leader of all time. What's up? It's Johanna with God is Glamorous, where we learn how to live our best lives through Jesus Christ. And today we are going to learn all about leadership by studying the leadership of Jesus Christ. So undoubtedly, unarguably, Jesus was the greatest leader of all time. So we've had a lot of great leaders throughout history, but no one tops the leadership of Jesus. So I'm going to go over a few qualities that Jesus had so that we can apply these to our everyday life and also apply them to our leadership styles as well. So if you are a Christian, if you are a Jesus follower, then you have been called to be a leader. In Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 13, God calls us to be the head and not the tail, above and not beneath. And because of this, that means that we should always strive to be good leaders. So let's take a look at some of the ways in which Jesus was a very, very good leader and how we can also apply this to our everyday lives. So whether you are a CEO of your own company, or whether you're a business owner, or whether you are in a career and you are leading a team, or whatever the case may be, if you are a follower of Christ, then you should strive to be a leader just like Jesus. So without further ado, let's go through the top character qualities that Jesus had in order to make him a great leader and how we can mimic these qualities as well. So in order to be a godly leader, a leader that mimics Christ, you should make sure that you have a servant's heart. So this is truly what separates a great leader from a godly leader, is the fact that they have a heart to serve, and it's called servant leadership, and this stemmed exactly from Jesus. So Jesus was not someone who wanted to be in the limelight all the time. He did not need to be the center of attention. He did not need to be the most popular. He just truly had the heart to serve other people. So in Mark chapter 10, verse 45, it specifically says that Jesus did not come to this earth to be served, but to serve and also to give his life as a ransom for many. So Jesus' main purpose in life was to serve other people and to ultimately die on the cross for our sins so that we could be saved. And as a leader, you should also take on this same characteristic to not only just come to be served, but so that you can serve other people. You should not be so obsessed with the spotlight. You should not be obsessed with getting followers. You should not be obsessed with people constantly praising you or being obsessed with likes and all this exposure on social media. Your main job as a leader is to focus on the needs of other people. So Jesus gives us an example of servant leadership by, of course, washing his disciples' feet. So one of my favorite quotes is that everyone wants to be great, but no one wants to wash any feet. And this is exactly what Jesus did. Jesus reminds us in Matthew chapter 20, verse 26, that if we want to be great, then we first need to be a servant for other people. So before you feel like you want to be well known or in the spotlight or whatever the case may be, you have to legit humble yourself and be a servant and have a heart to serve other people, because no one has ever become great by not focusing on the needs of other people. So right before Jesus was about to be crucified, he literally took the time out to make an example of servant leadership and decided to wash his disciples' feet. So it says, so he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. So Jesus begins to mimic the ultimate act of servitude by washing his disciples' feet. And Peter begins to object, and he's like, no, don't wash my feet. And Jesus was like, well, if I don't wash your feet, then you have no part of me. So if you plan to be a great leader, you need to have a servant's heart, and you need to have the heart to serve other people, because that is truly how you're able to become not just a great leader, but also a godly leader. So the second quality of a great leader is that great leaders never feel like they are too good to speak to anyone. So Jesus was a perfect example of this, and he spoke to everyone, regardless of their social status, regardless of their race, religion, class, creed, clean or unclean, he spoke to everyone. So he included women, he included children, he included people who were poor, he spoke to the sick, he spoke to those who were shunned away from the Jewish community. He literally spoke to everybody. So in Romans chapter 12, verse 16, it specifically encourages us to never be so good that we cannot associate with just anyone. So it says, live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. So Romans chapter 12, verse 16 is encouraging us to not be conceited and to live in harmony with everyone. And do not be so proud that you feel like you cannot sit or talk with anyone. So the concept of you can't sit with us and no new friends, please understand that this is not a biblical concept, and we should always strive to mimic the teachings of Jesus Christ. And if Jesus spoke to everyone, and if Jesus never took on this conceited way of thinking, then we should mimic Jesus as well. And we should also mimic this quality as well, and also be sure to speak to everybody regardless of where they come from. So the story of the woman with the issue of the blood takes place in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And it is a story of a woman who has been bleeding for 12 years, and she does not know exactly what the problem was. And during this time within the Jewish community, if someone was bleeding for a specific amount of time, they were considered unclean. When someone is unclean, then they are not allowed to touch anyone else, or else the other person would become unclean. So during this time, Jesus is walking through a really huge crowd, and she decides that if she just touches the hem of his garment, then she will be healed. And when she does this, Jesus immediately notices that someone touches him, and he turns around and asks his disciples who touched him. So ultimately, the woman reveals herself and lets Jesus know that she was the one that actually touched him. And instead of Jesus getting angry and upset that an unclean person touched him, he simply said, "Go in peace, daughter, your faith has made you well." So this is an example of how we should always mimic the character qualities of Jesus and never feel as though we are too good to speak to anyone, because Jesus was humble, Jesus was all-inclusive, and Jesus treated everyone the same. All right, so the next quality that you should mimic as a Christ-like leader is to lead with integrity. So it's not just enough to tell people how to live and how to act, but it's also really important to do what you say you're going to do as well. And Jesus was the ultimate example of practicing what you preach, because he lived out exactly what he taught other people. So in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 22, it says, "For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you might follow in his steps." So in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 22, Peter is expressing the fact that Christ came to be an example to all of us, and that we should also make an effort to follow in Jesus's footsteps. So as we mentioned earlier, Jesus was an example of how to live and how to act. And as we mentioned before, when Jesus washed his disciples' feet, he did this so that he can be an example to all of us as well. So in John chapter 13, verse 14, it says, "Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet." So in John chapter 13, verse 14, God is telling his disciples, because I washed your feet, you should also wash one another's feet. So Jesus did not just say, hey, wash someone's feet, and he just sat back and let someone else do it. Jesus actually lived out that principle and practiced what he preached. And ultimately, we are able to be servants to other people because we have seen Jesus do the same thing. And lastly, a truly great leader is someone who is led by God. So again, this separates a great leader from a truly godly leader. Is someone who considers God's will in every single thing that they do. Jesus understood that apart from God, he could do nothing, and he specifically mentions this in John chapter 5, verse 19. So it says, Jesus gave them this answer, "Very truly I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can do only what he sees his Father doing, because whatever the Father does, the Son also does." So in John chapter 5, verse 19, Jesus is specifically saying that apart from God, he can do nothing. He can only do what God allows him to do. And that's a great example of a truly godly leader. They don't seek their will or their desire, but they seek the desire of Jesus and of God. So in John chapter 6, verse 38, Jesus is saying, "I have come down from heaven not to do my will, but to do the will of him who sent me." So in John chapter 6, verse 38, Jesus is specifically mentioning that he has come down not to do his will, but to do the will of his Father. And that's exactly how we should be as leaders. when we are leading people, whether in our companies or whether in our jobs or in our careers or at home or within our family, it's really, really important to lead with the intention of God's will and not our own. Jesus was constantly taking that time to get alone, to be with God, so that he could understand what exactly was the will that God had for him versus the will that he had for himself. A great example of this was right before Jesus was about to be crucified in the Garden of Gethsemane. He prayed to God and asked God to take away the suffering that was going to be brought upon him. However, he ended the prayer by saying, "But not my will, God, but yours be done." And that's exactly how we should be as Christ-like leaders. We should always seek the will of God versus the will of our own. All right, so I hope this has helped you become a better leader. As a recap, these are the 4 leadership qualities that you should have in order to be a Christ-like leader and a godly leader. Number 1, you should be able to have a servant's heart. Don't become a leader just for the fame and the fortune and the clout and the attention. If you truly want to become a godly leader and a great leader, make sure that you are leading with a heart to serve other people. Number 2, make sure that you are never too good to speak to anyone. Make sure that you never have the attitude of not doing a job simply because it is above your pay grade, or not talking to someone simply because you feel as though they are beneath you. God was all inclusive. God spoke to anyone and everyone, regardless of their race, their gender, their ethnicity, regardless of their social status. And that's exactly how we should be as well. Make sure to include everyone and make sure to talk to everyone, and always make people feel as though you truly care about them and truly care about the needs that they have. Number 3, it's also important to set the example and lead as an example. It's not just enough to talk about it and to tell people how to act and how to behave, but also practice what you preach. And lastly, number 4, make sure that you have a heart that is after God and that you are constantly seeking the will of God rather than your own. That is truly what separates a great leader from a godly leader. All right, so I hope this has helped you. Please let me know if you have any questions. These are just the top 4 that I have, but we can go on and talk about the amazing character qualities that Jesus had as a leader. Jesus was an incredible leader. So if you would like me to do a part 2, 3, 4, 5, please let me know, because we can talk about this all day. But other than that, thank you so much for watching. And please let me know if you have any questions. And also be sure to check out these videos and be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Stay glamorous.